Hi, Michelle. Today we will talk about your piece, Body in Resonance.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Can you just can you shortly give some background of the piece, when it was written, who commissioned, for whom it was written?
Okay, this piece is part of my research in the hybrid between movement and sound. I was especially focused on capturing the sound of the body in movement from the experience of dance. So it was during my studies in Mexico. I developed 4 pieces for this research, trying to approach sound from different possibilities, which included using different kind of microphones, different kind of setups for the stage, and different collaborations, because these pieces were developed in collaboration with dancers and other sound artists. So this piece specifically was developed during a workshop at Laboratorio Almeda in Mexico. So what we had to do, we were invited to work together randomly. Like we were just attending the workshop and they organized groups. So that's a challenge in the work, because everybody wanted to work with movement and body, but from different perspectives, and trying to apply different kind of technologies and understanding the consequences very differently. And we had to put together all our ideas in a kind of coherent way in very short time. But that was a great experience, because we were working with Marco Donnarumma, a sound artist from Italy. And we were able to build a low-cost version of certain microphones he was developing at that time, that were thought to capture the sound of the muscles and the flow of the blood. So for me, this was an incredible step in the research, because I was trying to capture the sound of the body in movement, and this was like going directly to the experience of the body, and that was fascinating for me. I cannot tell you to what extent the microphones were doing that, like from a scientific approach. But the point is that we were capturing trying to isolate, because the microphones had a kind of silicone cover, to say, that was attached to the skin. So I think it was a very different kind of situation if compared to other kind of microphones, even contact microphones, because it was directed and was more flexible in the way that was always there in the movement itself of the body. So for me, this was the perspective. I wanted to capture the sound using these microphones, one in an arm and the other one in a leg. But the other sound artists were interested in other kind of approaches, so they used sensors to make a kind of organization of the using a kind of map according to the movement in the screen.
Yes.
And using the pulse, the beating of the
Yes.
heart, the pulse. So we get different approaches here for different purposes. And it was a collective work, in the sense that everybody was autonomous in what
Yes.
everybody was looking for.
And What was like, what was the main concept of that particular piece?
Well, the concept was how to make sound from the
Right.
body and the movement. That was like the concept. It's coming from there. But our relationship and the point with bodies in resonance is because everybody wanted something different, and we needed to find or to build a field in which we could create something coherent together,
Yes.
coming from just one body, the
Got it.
one
So
dancer.
it's like one piece, one body, it's dancer, right? And several
Yes.
composers or several, or how it works? How many were?
We were a group of 3 composers and 1 dancer.
Right.
In this particular, other projects were different, but this project was 3 composers and 1 dancer. And for me, the point was the sound itself. So I just captured the sound with the microphones. The other composer was using the pulse of the body to trigger a kind of text-based notation, a kind of a score that was happening live. So he selected according to the speed. The speed of the beat was organized according to a rate in certain categories of words. And the purpose of that, which kind of not to work, was that to give us instructions to process the sound live.
Right.
So as I was capturing the sound, I was also being a performer of the electronics, not just amplifying the sound, which was also interest to amplify the sound. You need to look for it. So we used, in my case, I used a code to try to look for the specific frequency, the low frequency, and we need to use buffers to make it sound, because these kind of frequencies are difficult to distinguish. But I also wanted to create in the piece through my participation was based on the sound that I captured from the dancer. So then instructions were thought to guide that kind of processes.
Yes.
But we didn't have so much time to develop the ideas or to, we were not able to recognize the limits of this kind of approach, in the sense that, for example, the kind of instructions were not so clear in terms of electronics, or not so idiomatic in terms of being an electronic performer. It was very traditionally musical, and there was kind of conflict that was also very interesting. How do you approach that when you are working in a collaboration with different points of view, but you got very clear what you want to, and that was great. And we got a lot of things happening because, for example, we had the opportunity to work during the development of the piece with the dancer, and we checked our codes, and we were making measurements with the sensors, and it was a different experience. And then at the moment of the concert, to say, the performance, of course, she was altered, she was excited, and the pulse of her cardiac rhythm was very fast, and it changed completely our experience, the real performance, because the instructions were coming super fast as she was feeling. And that was not something we were expecting, because mostly we were working with how her pulse was acting as a consequence of the movement itself. So it was something organically developed through the kind of movement she was doing. But at that point, it was a completely different experience, because it was involving her, that part of the humanity that is also energy for the body movement.
So you said,
was,
right? You can 3 composers and 1 dancer. So it was you who worked with the sound, and there was one who worked with text, right? So understand.
yes, the sound itself was captured by the microphones from
Yes.
her body. That's
Yes.
the sound. The other composer was just what is the word for this? He was using Arduino to try to translate this pulse to certain measurements and triggering the instructions for us to follow, for us to transform the sound, like to give musical qualities, if it's a way to say, to this source of sound. The only thing that I remember is that the other composer was working with his own voice. That's another layer, because he was using the same microphones attached to his throat here, externally, of course, and he was making a vocal performance, which also, sorry?
So I understand, right? So this was, his voice was a second musical source.
Yeah, performer, yes. Yes, I remember now.
From performer and from instructions of other composer. And then there was, so, okay. And
yes, that
was the piece?
Sorry?
How long was the piece?
It was undeterminate. We didn't want to structure in any sense. It was just improvisation in this sense. We just followed her, and she was reacting to the sound live and creating, and that movement created another kind of sound. So our processing was like this continuous feedback. And for this performance, it was 10 minutes around. I guess it was very organically coherent with the kind of event, because we were not the only one performance that day. So I think 10 minutes was reasonable at that moment, but we never stated, because the score, it's not a score of a structured piece. It was just part of the experiment, or part of the experimental approach. He wanted the material, the sound, to be to achieve certain qualities from a very musical perspective. I emphasize that because he was using metaphors like brilliant or granulate, but he also used something like counterpoint. So counterpoint.
Now you're referring to Marco Donnarumma, right?
Excuse me?
Now you are referring to Marco. Yes?
No. Marco was only the he was the person who was developing the workshop, but the other composer is Pedro. And the other composer is Rafael. So Pedro was the one who was working with the instructions and this kind of score, visual score, that depended on the pulse. And I guess it was also another kind of plane to analyze the displacement of the body, but according to the screen. And I think that the selection of each instruction, like he got 4 points in the screen, A, B, C, D, the 4 planes of the division of the screen. And according to the position of the body in this frame, each of the 4 points had different qualities in these instructions. For example, instructions of time, instructions of quality of the sound, instructions that I'm not very sure about how he organized it, but I remember as a performer that was my experience trying to follow the score. So if the performer, I mean the dancer, was mainly in a part of the scenario and capture in the screen, because this part was the visual, the camera, we were receiving the same kind of instructions all the time.
Good.
And the speed of the change of the instruction was the pulse.
Good.
So she was controlling with her body the kind of interactions that we could have with the sound. But it was kind of ideal in a sense, because it was almost impossible for us to respond to all the instructions at that speed. And we had to make decisions based on our own.
Good. And is there, in this piece, is there like some kind of main message, or it's very, very experimental? Are there some message, central message, what you want to communicate to the audience?
I don't approach my pieces from that place. For me, it was very timbral. I was working on timbre and trying to understand the interaction of sound movement, how timbre is a dynamic experience. And my research was based on the impact of movement, and that hybrid movement is sound, but sound has movement, and
Right.
this cycle. That was my main point. I think that the workshop in general, like we were working with Marco from the idea of taking sound from the body. That was the other layer of the research. This experience that is not instrumentally performatic.
Right.
We were not working with instruments or the body performing instruments, but the body in movement. There were other performances that day that were so much more theatrical in a sense, less in the practice of dance. We were working with a dancer, so her movement was very from the dance perspective. So, but that was the main core of the interactions that we were developing.
And
I guess that.
And regarding your experience, right? Regarding your piece, right, which you created, right? This, what was the main sensorial experience, or what participant, not what audience can see, watch, listen? What was idea behind it? I'm sitting in an audience call. What kind of sensorial exposure was on me?
But do you mean what I wanted the audience to have, or
Yes.
what I recognized from the audience?
What you would like to audience, right?
I don't think about that. I think it was so much more my own research with the sound, and I was trying to understand, and I share it, and people can understand whatever they want. I want them to listen, for example, to appreciate. Maybe it was very evident because the visual impact of the dancer with all the microphones attached is strong.
Yes.
And you get a perspective of, you can decipher what's happening in terms of, but I don't want to impose my thoughts and my search on the people who are listening, because I think it is so much more interesting if free will guides and your own interests and the coincidences when you are working on the same, or you are thinking the same, and you say, oh, I have been working on that, or if it is a surprise for you, I never had this experience before, and it's attractive. So generally, I try not to.
Yes, it was one. Was there some kind of sections, separate sections in the piece, or it was like one?
Most of the time, I work with this kind of structural points, but for this piece, No, we didn't. I think it was because there were so many people working,
Yes.
and I think that we just rely on the dancer because it was her decision
Yes.
when to stop, and it was her construction. That was amazing for me to put the performers from the body, like the dancers. I also worked with a stage performer in another piece. And I think it is a challenge for them to give them
Got it.
the responsibility of guiding the sound. And when they recognize themselves like the sources of sound, it is amazing how they transform the way they move and how they interact with the space. So I think that for us was important to give them a space, to give, in this case, to give her a space for the development of the performance as she considered necessary.
Got it. And what kind of technologies you use? What was the hardware, or yes, what was the hardware and software?
As I told you, the microphones were developed like a low cost version of the X-Sense microphones. I don't remember the brand, but it's something developed by Marco Donnarumma specifically with that purpose, capturing the muscles and the blood flow. That in terms of microphones, for me, it was part of my research to address different kind of microphones, because that is very different in the kind of timbral experience you create. Because if you capture something that is so specific and internal, your experience with the sound is like that. It is different when you capture with ambient microphones, and you also have the space and things happening in the space, or contact that are more in the friction and this kind of. So every kind of microphones were determinant in the kind of qualities I could work with. That was very important for me. So in this piece, these microphones. And I was working with a super collider.
Yes.
My whole research was done with this software because I'm not a coder. I cannot consider myself a coder, or I don't think that I would be able to create a code from zero in a performance. But something great that I have discovered is that it's a huge community of very open, of course, because open source and free software. You've got people sharing. So you can construct, for me, the experience was to work with people sharing their own codes, and I was taking the roots and also the manual, the help part of the software is designed in a way that you can construct from the basics. And I got my particular synths, my synths for every specific process that I want to use. So I set up my codes like this is reverb, and I know how to alter or change a particular parameter and change it. So that's the way I work. Pedro was working with Arduino to
Yes.
capture and he was doing, I guess he was also, what is the software they use for, there's that software that is used specifically for visual communication with Arduino. I don't remember. But he was not working with sound directly. For him, it was the camera that was connected to this software to have the plan. There's a word for this, but the XY plan, this could be. And he's got the technology to attach and capture the pose, that it was with a finger.
Yes.
So, and the other composer was working with his own voice, so also the same microphones I was using, and he was also using Super Collider. He was processing his own voice as a second performer. Yes.
Can you imagine the same piece but without sensors? Let's say you just perform. You're taking the sound from dancer, but just create on your own.
Like only the dancer and me?
Yes.
Yes, I got experiences like that. That is very interesting because I try to develop the concept from different perspectives. So one of my pieces, I started with electronic composition, like acoustic music, acousmatic music, fixed media, electronics, and she's dancing with that. And then I start to amplify the sound, and then the electronics disappears, and it's only her own sound amplified and processed. That's the process that I presented in that piece. And recently I had, like last year, I had the opportunity to work with Indira Montoya, who is also a performer from Argentina. And we did it only with the sound. We used these microphones and contact microphones.
Yes.
It was just the sound. It's so demanding because it puts a lot of responsibility on the performer as a sonic producer, like a source of sound. If I don't move, there's no sound.
Yes.
If I don't generate something, and it is also this expectation, because these pieces are experimental in the sense I want to see how it grows, but we don't have anything like a pact behind. It's just let it be, create the sonic experience and the timbral transformations from what is happening, and it demands a lot of energy focusing on the present.
Got it.
And that's
and how your cooperation with other participants shaped the piece.
Yes, in a very determined way, because you need to deal with the desires of another person. And maybe for me, directly the score was not giving me like freedom to process the sound in the way that I wanted. But at the same time, some instructions were so open or so not applicable to what we were doing, that I used that as a freedom to make my own choices. But I think it is also necessary to have these kind of experiences when you are doing, especially when you are doing research with that. That's not only the artistic value of the piece, but also you are trying to answer questions and you want to understand this kind of conflict of interests can also transform in opportunities to deepen in your thinking. Because, well, if these are the conditions, how am I going to resonate with that? I think that the title was very addressed from this perspective of we needed to find a way to make it. And I think that it was great to have the experience of the performer with her fast beating, the pause, because it made us to start the piece with from another point and another reality, making the score very impossible for us. So that was a challenge.
And the last question, what would you suggest for other composers who have never worked with these body microphones or who have never been in this very research type projects, what would be your suggestion? But they would like to start doing something.
They would like to start. There are options there. And I think that something I have been able to recognize is that technology is it has like two phases. You think that you need to spend a lot of money to have quality, and it could be right. If you have the best technology devices, you are going to have really great quality in the kind of sound you capture and how to process, and that's a reality. But then how you as an artist has a position to make your own and to make your place and also your statement. So how you work with the limitations of low cost technology, if it is just your possibility, or things that you can create at home, like building your own microphones on, but the access to free software is super important for me. It's like an ethics in teaching, and also a social way, commitment that we do things because we want to share our knowledge and increasing and contribute to what humanity is and how we understand each other. So I think that this has been a really great tool to do quality things without putting everything you got, just to have access to a software and work with quality. So I think it is something that you need to think from a political perspective, but there are ways to do it. And I would encourage people to create those spaces and do from their own needs and possibilities.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you.